Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation.
Figuring out what day and what time you should schedule your bowl game for is somewhat of a difficult call. Mainly because no matter what you do, unless you pick something like 2 o'clock in the morning, where you're going up against nothing but infomercials, you're going to face some sort of alternative programming, or something where someone sitting in front of the TV has the option to switch. This is a critical decision to make, because the higher the television ratings, the more money involved. And it's even more critical when it's the final year of your TV contract and you're looking to renew. So now, I want you to put yourself in the mindset of an executive. I want you to imagine the worst possible thing that your bowl game could go up against from a television perspective. What would be a horrible idea that would instantly kill your ratings and make everything go down the drain? How about going directly up against an NFL playoff game? Does that seem like a good idea? Does that seem smart to have your bowl going head-to-head with a postseason game involving two of the best teams in the NFL, which everyone and their mother knows is the king of this country? And I don't know what's crazier, the fact that the bowl game tried this, or the fact that the bowl executives were shocked when it didn't work out, even though literally anyone with a brain could have told you that was going to happen. Well, in 1988, for some inexplicable reason, the geniuses at the Sun Bowl said, hey, let's have our bowl game take place at the same time as the NFL playoffs. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. Literally everything could have gone wrong. This is the story behind the worst move in the over 85-year history of the Sun Bowl. Before I talk about the horrible decision in question and just how utterly moronic it was, because trust me, it's really bad, we need some context to understand the two teams playing, and how the game was supposedly going to shape up on paper. In one corner, you have the Alabama Crimson Tide out of the SEC. This was going to be Alabama's third trip to El Paso in 6 years, which seemed kinda odd on the surface, but make no mistake about it, this Alabama team was good. They spent practically the entire season ranked inside the top 20 of the AP poll. They entered this game with an 8-3 record, which was an improvement over Bill Curry's previous season with the Crimson Tide, when they won 7 games. As a side note, to learn more about the great coaching career of Bill Curry, and an incredibly bold decision he made during a bowl game during his time at Georgia Tech, click the card in the upper right corner. The Crimson Tide had an absolutely suffocating defense that allowed just 14.5 points per game entering bowl season, including 2 shutouts and 5 games where they held their opponents to 10 points or less. And perhaps most impressive about this Alabama team in particular was that they were 5-0 on the road, outscoring their opponents 179-91 in games played outside the state, so they had no problem going into hostile environments and taking care of business. But now was one of their biggest challenges yet, because now they had to deal with the triple option. Because in the other corner, you had the Army Black Knights, who were coming off of one of their best regular seasons ever in the post-World War II era. They ended the regular season with a 9-2 record, with the 9 wins being the most they've had before bowl season since all the way back in 1949, when they went 9-0. The 9 wins also tied the program record for most wins in a season, as up until that point, the Black Knights had never won 10 or more games. It was a great bounce-back year following a disappointing 1987 campaign where they went 5-6. And no, the strength of their schedule was not great, as they played 4 teams that were not Division 1A schools by playing Holy Cross, Bucknell, Yale, and Lafayette. But they took care of business and won the games they were supposed to win, and most importantly, defeated Navy in their regular season finale, which is all that really matters. On paper, this was supposed to be a great game. A ranked Alabama team against one of the best Army teams in recent times, and 2 teams with extremely large fan bases. The Sun Bowl was licking their chops at how great they got it from a matchup perspective. There was no way that the game could have screwed this up from a TV ratings perspective. Bowl games are already great for ratings, but this was the icing on the cake. And history was on their side, to say the least. One of the reasons why the Sun Bowl loved having Alabama, outside of the fact that Alabama drew fans to the stadium, was because Alabama drew high TV ratings. Here's a graph showing the last 5 Sun Bowls from 1983 to 1987, with Alabama playing in the 1983 game against SMU and the 1986 game against Washington. You can see those ratings clearly towering over the other 3 games. Alabama-Washington was at an 11.5, and Alabama-SMU was at a 9.2. The next closest game in that stretch drew a 6.1. Alabama was a ratings goldmine, and keep in mind that those 2 games that Alabama played in weren't even good, as Alabama beat SMU 28-7 and beat Washington 28-6. Meanwhile, the other 3 games on the list, they were all nail-biters. The 1984 game between Maryland and Tennessee drew a 4.3, even though Maryland won 28-27. The 1985 game between Arizona and Georgia drew a 5.6, and that game ended in a 13-13 tie. And the 1987 game between Oklahoma State and West Virginia drew a 6.1, and that game ended with Oklahoma State winning 35-33. Alabama playing bad games was incredible for the ratings. Now, combine that with a game against Army, a team with arguably a larger fan base than Washington and SMU due to the sentimental attachment to military schools, and a game that actually looks like it could be close, and you've got something special. You'd have to literally try to mess up this golden opportunity. And sure enough, they did just that. Because you're never going to believe what genius idea the Sun Bowl came up with in terms of when to air the game. The Sun Bowl was scheduled to begin at 12 o'clock Eastern on Christmas Eve. Seems like a good time to start a game, right? You're playing the game early enough in the day where people will be able to watch the game and get their football fix, while also being able to attend Mass and Christmas Eve dinner and do whatever festivities they might do that night. Plus, there were no other bowl games airing that day, so the Sun Bowl had no competition from other college football games to worry about. And on top of that, this was the first nationally televised bowl of the year, as even though the California Bowl and Independence Bowl took place before this, neither of those games got a national television deal, so the Sun Bowl had the advantage of being first. This seems like the perfect time slot, right? So you might be asking yourself, what's the catch? And the catch was that even though the Sun Bowl was the only college football game taking place that day, it wasn't the only football game taking place that day. Because you see, there's this other football league that you might have heard about that had a game that day called the National Football League. And this wasn't just any NFL game. This was a playoff game, as at 1:30 Eastern, right when halftime of the Sun Bowl hit, the Cleveland Browns and Houston Oilers were set to kick off in the AFC wildcard game. And aside from the fact that this was obviously a big deal because it was a playoff game, this was a big deal because of the history the Browns and the Oilers had with each other. The two teams were division rivals, and not only did they split the season series, but both games were decided by one possession, so no one knew which way the rubber match was going to go. No disrespect to the Sun Bowl, but ask yourself as the average American which one you're more likely to watch, an NFL playoff game or the Sun Bowl. Now the Sun Bowl had some solutions to this problem. They could have played the game on a different day. Heck, there were no bowl games taking place on Tuesday, December 27th, so they could have gone with that spot. They could have played on Christmas Day like they did the last 2 years, and set up a football doubleheader with them in the Aloha Bowl. There were also plenty of other dates, like December 28th, December 30th, and December 31st, that they could have played the game early and had a doubleheader with another bowl game. If they were dead set on playing Christmas Eve, which I'm not sure why since in the prior 54 installments of the game, they'd only played on Christmas Eve twice, so it's not like this was a renowned tradition like the Rose Bowl playing on New Year's Day, or the Aloha Bowl playing around Christmas time. But if they were dead set on playing that day, they could have played the game later in the day. They could have started the game at 5 o'clock Eastern, so as not to interfere with the NFL, although it would have been a bit colder and more unpleasant for the fans in attendance. This was not a situation where the bowl game's hands were completely tied, and there was nothing whatsoever that could be done about it. There were incredibly workable and feasible options, especially since the NFL playing a playoff game on Christmas Eve was known from the start of the year, as the NFL always played a playoff game on that Saturday afternoon. But guess what the Sun Bowl decided to do? They decided that they were going to go directly up against the NFL. And everyone told the organizers that this was a horrible idea. Basically, everyone associated with the game was begging the bowl organizers to reconsider, because there was no way that this was going to work out the way that they thought it would. Rudy Martzke, a columnist of sports television for the USA Today, basically said that the Sun Bowl was going to get decimated in the ratings once the NFL game started. Len DeLuca, the director of program acquisition for CBS, said that having the Sun Bowl compete directly against the NFL was obviously a blow, but said, "We have to respect the fiber of a long relationship with the Sun Bowl," which is a fancy way of saying, we have to respect this decision, even though it was made by people lacking the mental capacity to think properly. Because let's just be blunt here, the Sun Bowl was living in a delusional world of fantasies if they thought this was a good idea. Ted Howden Jr., the president of the Sun Bowl committee, said that he wasn't worried whatsoever about the NFL, and that this wasn't going to be a problem. For one, the Sun Bowl had a 90-minute head start on the NFL, which conveniently ignores the fact that the Sun Bowl would be hitting halftime right as the playoff game was starting, leading people to flip their channels during the break and then stay on the NFL game. He thought that if the Sun Bowl was a good competitive game, then people would want to continue watching that over an NFL playoff game. Howden also said that the fact that the Browns and Oilers were playing in the playoffs actually helped their cause, because the game was a rematch of what happened in Week 16. As Howden said, "We've talked to people, and they don't want to see the same game at the same place for the second week in a row." I'm sorry, what kind of logic is that? People absolutely will watch rematches in the playoffs. If you're an NFL fan, and you just saw the Cowboys and Eagles play each other in the final week of the season, and it was a close game, and now they're playing in a rematch the following week in the playoffs, who's going to honestly say, "Yeah, I saw this game last week, so I'm going to pass"? Aside from the fact that people watch playoff games regardless because of the stakes, has Howden never heard of baseball, or basketball, or hockey, where the playoff series are best of 7 and are nothing but rematches? Under his logic, he would have no problem going up against Game 2 of the World Series because people saw Game 1, and they really don't want to see the same teams play against each other again so soon. Understandably, Martzke called this comment absurd, especially since literally all of the evidence suggested that rematches draw higher viewership numbers than other games. As Martzke said, once the Browns-Oilers game starts, the only people who will watch the Sun Bowl are retired Army personnel and the state of Alabama. And to do this in the final year of your contract, after you say you need a TV rating of anywhere above 7 to be confident in CBS and John Hancock renewing their agreements, is one of the most short-sighted things I've ever seen in my life. The good news for the Sun Bowl was that they got a great game, and was one of the best Sun Bowls ever played. In an incredible back-and-forth affair where Army led at 28-20 after 3 quarters, Alabama scored the final 9 points of the game, scoring the game-winning touchdown with 4 minutes left to win at 29-28. Army played their hearts out. The Crimson Tide allowed less than 100 yards rushing per game, and Army ran it down their throats, picking up 350. But it wasn't enough, as for the third time in the last 6 seasons, Alabama came into El Paso to play in the Sun Bowl and came out of there victorious. And Sam Jenkins, the executive director for the Bowl, was incredibly optimistic that this incredible game was going to be watched by millions of people, and that they did great in the ratings. As Jenkins said upon waiting for the results, "With the game we had, I think probably we should do real well." Here's the bad news. To the surprise of literally no one except for the Sun Bowl organizers who somehow did not see this coming, the game was a complete disaster from a TV ratings perspective. Somehow, even after the 1984 Sun Bowl drew a record low 4.3 because it went against the NFL, the Sun Bowl decided to do it again, and the ratings were even worse. Because for this iteration of the game, which was a great game featuring a surefire ratings juggernaut in Alabama, the Sun Bowl drew a 4.1. That was it. It was the lowest rating at the time ever for a Sun Bowl. Howden said afterwards that the problem with the ratings was that the game was going up against the NFL. He said, "The NFL is the stiffest competition you could face. I talked to the people at CBS, and they told me the AFC wildcard game got a 19.8 overnight rating. Running against the NFL, it's like the kiss of death." No way. Really? I'm stunned by these developments. He then added, "We held up our end. We brought in Army and Alabama. The bottom line is that we can't compete with the NFL." I don't know. I don't know what prior evidence there was to suggest that the Sun Bowl couldn't compete against the NFL, except for, literally everything. And Howden then added that the frustrating part was that the game had a double-digit rating in the first half before going down the ditch in the second half when the playoff game started, saying, "An NFL game? Well, that's like going up against Cosby." Safe to say, this game from a television standpoint was an absolute disaster. So what's the moral of the story here? It's a moral that literally everyone knows, but it took the Sun Bowl organizers losing millions of dollars to truly figure out for themselves. Don't try to compete against the NFL. College football is great, but when it comes to the ratings, the NFL is king. You're going to lose no matter what you do, especially if it's a playoff game taking place at the same exact time. Going up against the NFL playoffs is just asking for nobody to watch your game take place. Because when it came to the 1988 Sun Bowl and the absolutely idiotic scheduling behind it, as the game went on and the sun was beginning to fade away, so too were the television ratings.
Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com
And be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.